Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Let's talk about the new moon in Virgo, which is occurring on the 6th or 7th of September. I can't believe we're actually already in September, but we are. Hoping you guys are doing well and wondering how you are all coping and managing the current paradigm, let's call it. Okay, so I guess first of all, I'd like to say in Australia, it's actually Father's Day today. So I want to wish my heart and soul, my father, a happy Father's Day. He's not here in the physical, but he's here nonetheless. And happy Father's Day to all the fathers on the globe, on the planet. That's the first thing that I want to say. The second thing that I want to say is that this is a little bit outside of astrology, but I'd just like to raise it as something that some of you may find interesting. I often listen to a guy called Tim Wilde, who essentially does talks and programs and workshops and things of that nature relative to Ascension. He calls it practical ascension. And I'm very, very fond of him and his work, and find him to be incredibly connected and attuned to other dimensions of consciousness, and has a pretty good grasp on what's happening here and what's happening in altered states of consciousness, let's say. So I was listening to him this morning, and he was talking about more or less what's going on at the moment, but from the spiritual dimensions. And it's very reassuring to hear him talk about what he does, because he kind of, I find that by listening to him, it does actually help me become realign with being more centered again, because as we know, the nature of reality at the moment is extremely cataclysmic and challenging, and it's incredibly easy to get swept up into the drama, the chaos. In fact, it's extremely difficult not to. And so we all experience a sense of frustration and a sense of uncertainty. And we just need to find ways that support our process and journey with alignment and or realignment and centeredness. And so anyway, what he was talking about today, amongst several things, one thing that I've not heard him speak about before, he may have, but I just haven't heard him speak about it before, was something called walkings, as in walk in. And the basic premise around that kind of understanding is that there are souls that will descend into into a particular being, person, and will take over the contract of that soul. And he suggested that he's had some affirmations and confirmations that this indeed is about to start happening, relative to specifically around the events that are occurring on the planet at the moment. And he suggested that there would be there would be specific souls that would walk into particular souls on the planet that have perhaps a leading role where, yes, they've signed a contract to play that role, so there is that, but there is also the side that the laws of nature have been broken, and so that's why we're having, in part, that's why we're having this incredible spiritual warfare, if you like, just to use that language. And so he just said that, you know, over the next 3 to 6 to 9 months, we're going to see this gradual kind of shift in the very people that perhaps are playing a role at the moment, which is what I would call very unconscious, and emanates from a place of control, Saturn, and fear, Saturn. And so anyway, I found that message very encouraging, actually. And he did say, though, that we're not going to see, it's not going to be some instant, you're not going to see some leader suddenly become an angel. It's not going to be as, drastically obvious as that, but there will be a shift in certain type of people on the globe. And so that's just an interesting piece of information that I find actually very encouraging. And so it'll just be very interesting to observe that and see what comes up. One thing that I noticed about this new moon is, well, several things, but one thing in particular was the trine to Uranus. There's literally an exact trine to Uranus. And I kind of think that that could have something to do with what Tim was talking about as well. Because the trine is always an aspect that is very supportive, right? And Uranus is a catalyst for change and for chaos and shock and for unexpected turn of events and just unexpected things to take place. So perhaps that the new moon cycle, which begins in a couple of days' time, forming this trine to Uranus, could be sort of the backdrop for perhaps this particular message that Tim Wilde was talking about. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just bring up the chart for the new moon. And so this is the date for Australia. So first of all, it is always very, very useful to look at where the new moon lands in your own chart. That's one thing, because that's going to speak to a very unique and personal cycle to yourself, to your own life circumstances, of course. Then you can also, if you wanted to, look at the chart for the location you're in, because that will just show the lunation cycle for your location, your state, your country, wherever it is you are. So there's, two ways of doing it. I generally kind of look at both. I look at where is the new moon in my own chart and where is the new moon in the location that I'm in at any given time. And so this chart reflects Melbourne, Australia. So you can see that the Sun Moon conjunction, which is a new moon, is at 14 degrees of Virgo. And let's just grab some tools. Now, I think this is, it's not necessarily an easy new moon, but there is some hope and some potential. Now, I didn't really want that particular pencil. That's a bit messy. Let's just grab this. Okay, so new moon in Virgo, Sun and Moon conjunction. The trine to Uranus is here. So basically a trine aspect is the same element. So we've got Virgo, which is Earth, Taurus, which is Earth. Now, if you note, Uranus is at exactly 14 degrees as well, as is the new moon. So that's an incredibly powerful trine aspect, particularly because it's to the exact degree. So Uranus has a very strong presence in the lunation cycle that we are about to step into. I think the Uranus element will be very useful and very helpful from the point of view of it. Uranus always brings disruption. There's no question about that. And it produces things unexpectedly. It's very a sudden, electrifying type of energy. As I said, it's a catalyst for change. It messes with the very dense sort of structures of things, if you like. It just rips through things like a tornado and brings about a significant shift and change. Now, we've got this going on all year relative to the Saturn-Uranus square, which we've had all year. And we've got one more passing of this transit to occur in December. So the fact that we've gone through two passings, two transits of the Uranus-Saturn, and we're heading towards the end of the year. This is, you know, partially the reason, probably one of the biggest reasons, as a matter of fact, as to why we're seeing such an intensified cataclysmic sort of spin on things. You know, things are ramping up, intensifying literally by the second. And sorry, let me just so this intensification is just going to continue really throughout the rest of the year, without question. It's just going to ramp up and ramp up and ramp up, and indeed it is. We are all aware of what's happening on the collective plane relative to the global, you know, situations with the mandates, changes, you know, all those matters. So I don't really want to go into all of that. I just want to try and sort of focus more on the astrology and the spiritual sort of takeaways, if you like, with these energies. But it is, you know, important to always remember that with every new moon and full moon, you know, really throughout this whole year, these new moons and full moons are basically being triggered in some kind of way. And also Uranus-Saturn is always at the backdrop of every single new moon and full moon that we are experiencing this year, right? So it's no different with this particular new moon, because the new moon is actually picking up that trine to Uranus, which is still actually square Saturn as well, right? So there it is again. And we've seen this in the last, I've talked about the Uranus-Saturn and specifically Uranus as well, really picking up aspects with the new moons and full moons. Of course, Pluto is also in the picture. Pluto at the moment is exactly square Eris, and Pluto's moving retrograde still. It goes direct in October, as does Saturn. They both go direct in October. So October, November, and December are probably going to be even more difficult than now, to be honest with you. But that doesn't mean that we have to, you know, crash or lose hope, right? We just need to understand that the intensification of the backdrop of these larger cycles, they need to complete their process. And when it comes to outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, Neptune is always a lot more, what appears to be a lot more subtle, confusing, fog-like, and unclear, right? Incredibly powerful, though subtle does never mean not powerful. On the other hand, though, when we're talking about Uranus and Pluto, they seem to present really obvious cataclysmic nature of events, and that's abundantly clear. So when Pluto goes direct in October, it's going to slowly but surely start moving away from the square to Eris. But the fact is that it's literally right there at the moment, Pluto Eris. We just cannot deny the power of this particular aspect with these two particular bodies. As we know, Pluto is the ultimate transformation, transmutation in Capricorn of all the systems, all the old patriarchal systems. And it's ramping up because Pluto's proceeding to complete his journey in the sign of Capricorn. So we're literally at the tail end of that, right? So by 2023, Pluto would have ingressed into Aquarius, even though it's just going to be like a little prelude, because it's just going to enter into Aquarius and then it's going to sort of jump back out, go back into Capricorn, hang around in Capricorn for a little while longer, and then eventually get into Aquarius in 2024, right? So we must understand that on an evolutionary level, especially when you're talking about a Pluto, the planet Pluto, which corresponds to the individual soul that we each are, and also the collective soul as well, which is all about evolution, transformation, transmutation, death, and rebirth. And we are just, again, you know, experiencing that to the most maximum sort of point, if you like, relative to our lifetime, and perhaps even one of the most intensified processes of evolution that we've had in thousands and thousands and thousands of years, on an individual and a collective level at the same time. Because individually, each soul is obviously going through their own personal evolutionary journey, right? And that entails numerous lifetimes with numerous cataclysmic events and experiences and so on and so forth. But we don't get a level of transmutation and transformation and transition on a collective level in the way that we are now frequently. In fact, the extent of it now seems to be that, you know, it's around about 10,000 years or more. We don't really know exactly, but a minimum of 10,000 years of this massive transition. So again, I'm really bringing that up again, although we've talked about this before. I think most of us are aware of it. It's just really important to remember that as the bigger picture of everything that's playing out. And certainly Pluto being, you know, at the exact sort of degree of Eris, they're on the same degree, so that square is ever so intense at the moment. And we know Eris is the goddess of chaos, discord, and destruction. And just take a look around. That's not a personal opinion, that's just a fact, right? So just a reminder that, you know, the rest of this year, in no uncertain terms, is going to continue to ramp up, and indeed it is. I mean, certainly I know it's happening collectively, and I suppose on one hand drawing reference points back to where I am, because I can do that with firsthand experience, because this is where I live at the moment. And you know, there's mind-blowing things going on here. You know, it's literally, it seems to be a reflection of the most severe tyranny that we've ever seen in this country ever. So it's very challenging times, to say the least. So these energies are at the backdrop of this new moon, is basically what I'm trying to say. Now, the other interesting thing is that we have Hygeia, okay, with this new moon as well. And so the new moon being in Virgo, Hygeia is the goddess of health. She was the daughter of Asclepius, who's the god of health. So the archetype of Hygeia has been extremely present since this global health situation began, right from the beginning, where there was this message of washing the hands. That was when Hygeia was in Gemini. Gemini rules the hands, of course. So anyway, Hygeia's journey through Virgo has been very significant, because we've seen the amount of changes, new information, new science, new data, new stats. You know, so many things are coming out relative to the proposed or mandated or coerced suggestions around that liquid form that is injected in people's bodies, as I often like to say, right? So I think, again, with Hygeia here being in Virgo and the new moon in Virgo, I just think that that's leading us to, it's opening up a brand new cycle for the month relative, again, to understanding more about what's going on with the health situation, the global health situation, which just keeps virtually changing in its narrative on a daily basis. And most of the messages that do come through from the consensus media level are, you know, it is obvious that the information and the data that comes through is all geared towards one particular narrative, the ultimate being that, you know, 80% of the population on the entire globe have taken the path of the liquid. So, you know, I've been thinking about that a lot, and I thought it's just so funny, in not as in haha, but it is interesting that in terms of evolutionary astrology, there is a very clear method that we employ to understand what is happening on an evolutionary level in our own lives and for the entire world. And the model really is based on, it's based on Uranus, Neptune and Pluto from the point of view of, there is and Saturn, how could I leave out Saturn? Saturn, which speaks to this 3D reality, which is just dying, it's literally crumbling, is 80% or thereabouts of the entire population. So what does that mean? That means that 80% of human beings on the planet, and this is not a judgment, this is just a way of explaining consensus reality versus individuals who live on a more individuated path, individual level. Saturn always speaks to systems, government structures, authority, etc. So if 80% of the population live their life according to the Saturn reality, which is about compliance, control, regime, rules, and so forth, at the very worst, when it's playing out through those particular frames, it is tyranny, basically. When things appear to be going fairly normal on the planet, if you like, although they've never really been normal, this has just been an accumulation of control and tyranny over 10,000 years through the patriarchal system. So it's just a gradual kind of program that's been playing out and has many subtle and hidden layers to it. And so it's just reached its crisis point. Anyway, back to the original point. 80% of the population operate from Saturn consensus reality. And so it's no surprise then that you hear world leaders saying that they want 80% of people to be inserted with the liquid, right? And so that's not a coincidence that they choose that particular figure. That's just a pure, straight reflection and correlation to the consensus state, period. And so the remainder, which is, let's say, 20% or thereabouts, is the pushback that we're seeing collectively in every single country, in every single state, no matter how small it may appear or whatever it is. That's the minority. It's always the minority. The majority is always consensus, Saturn reality, and the minority are the ones that operate from, live from, understand from, understand from the Uranus plane of things. And there are some kind of in between stages as well, because there's people in the consensus reality state who have, because there's all these sub stages as well. It's a bit complicated to explain, but if you can just imagine, there's a soul that's been on the consensus state for many lifetimes, and they've just entered into a sub state of Uranus. So they're sort of transitioning over, and so we're seeing that a lot at the moment. And part of that is seeing the amount of people that are actually waking up on the planet at the moment with what's going on. I receive numerous messages and emails from all sorts of people from all around the world, really young people, like people, just early 20s, early 30s, whatever age it may be, telling me that sharing with me that they have, recently just woken up. It's like the light bulb has just gone off inside, right? So I see these souls as the ones that have been on the consensus, and they're now on that sort of sub-Uranus period, if you like, which is the beginning of the awakening, right? That's just a sort of simple way of explaining that whole model. So there is a necessity for souls to wake up at this time, and it is happening. It is happening everywhere, and it is always Uranus that creates that awakening. And also, when you're talking about Eris, one person, I've just forgotten his name. I think it was an astrologer who recently passed on. Just forgotten his name. I think his first name was Nick. Anyway, it could have been him or it could have been somebody else, but I just remember coming across somewhere where I was reading about Eris, that Eris is the frequency, the body that wakes up humanity from its deep slumber. And I love that comment, that the way of framing the energy of Eris, because that is what's happening, to humanity at the moment. Everyone's been woken up from their slumber, and it doesn't matter which side you sit on. There is a waking up. There is a shaking up of the false security that we had kind of created, if you like. It is false. It was false, because if it was real, it wouldn't be broken down and crumbled and blown into smithereens, which is what's happening. So yeah, we really just are at that process. Okay, more about the new moon. Again, going back to Hygeia, I think Hygeia is, again, for this lunation cycle, she's going to bring in some very important information and knowledge to us about this health situation. And that's an energy that new moon is going to carry with it, for the next 4 weeks, right? Because the new moon, as we are aware, it's a new moon, which means it's like a dark seed. It's the beginning of something. It's always the beginning of something. So the fact that Hygeia is there, she's planting a seed in this new moon cycle, which would be described and defined by everything to do with Virgo. And there are many things about the archetype of Virgo, but the most important thing for all of us at the moment is this matter of health. And as I like to say with Virgo, it is about using our own critical reasoning skills. Now, I noticed that, and I've touched on this, so I won't go into it extensively, but just a reminder, I talked about Venus in Libra being conjunct Vesta in Libra. And I said this a few weeks ago, that there would be significant amount of court cases, law matters that would come up very prominently in different countries and in different states relative to the current conditions. Okay, so because the fact of the matter is that, there are many people who are at risk of losing their livelihood if they don't succumb to the narrative that's being projected. And so there's incredible, fear, of course. But anyway, there are a lot of people that have approached lawyers, and there are a lot of lawyers, fortunately, that can also see very clearly what this paradigm is about, what this narrative is about. And they are working very, very hard to assist people relative to their rights. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not an expert in law, and I'm not going to pretend to be. Law is incredibly complex, and it has so many, such a specialized field, as I consider my field in astrology to be extremely specialized, and I feel confident in speaking on astrological matters from a point of experience and so forth. But I can't say that I can do the same with law. I have somebody very close to me, however, who does specialize in law and does kind of help me understand a few things here and there. And without, unpacking the complexities of that, there is a lot of information that's circulating that's not always necessarily coming from the levels of knowledge of how law actually works, and the powers that authorities can be given based on what is considered as, a national emergency relative to a health situation and so forth. Law gets very tricky in those ways, and things change very quickly, and matters get passed very, very quickly through legislation due to the powers of emergency, global national emergency state, if you like. So it's very, very complex. And, I'm just saying that because there's a lot of people that can be given incorrect information, or information that doesn't actually look at the deep technical components, right? And we're not to, how do we understand that unless we're, a lawyer ourselves or specialize in particular areas of law? We wouldn't know. But the point is, though, that this Venus Vesta, I always had a feeling that it would bring up a lot of law cases, and that's indeed what's happening. Last time, as I spoke about, there was a group of lawyers in the USA who have begun a process of court cases and so forth around members of the aviation industry. Now in Australia, just a few days ago, there's a group of lawyers in a particular state here in this country who have also started the engine, if you like, for court cases relative to this particular global situation where people are either losing their livelihood, as in their work, their profession, and are being left with very little or no choice at all. So these guys that have kicked off this court case in the Supreme Court in Sydney will probably end, this case will probably end up being a landmark case, for this country, for a particular global situation that it's going to be landmark because we've never seen anything like it before. So there is a lot going on, right? And there's that Vesta and Venus in the sign of Libra. Now Venus is the evening star at the moment. Normally Venus in Libra, we'd associate it with love and beauty and harmony and balance and peace, and of course it is all that, but never forget that Libra is the sign of fairness, equality and justice and law. So Venus's journey through Libra has been, speaking very strongly to those sorts of matters, and Vesta has aligned with Venus in that way. And remember, Vesta is the goddess of dedication and focus to the exclusion of everything else. And these, for example, the lawyers that I just recently heard talking about their case, the Supreme Court case in Sydney, these guys are working around the clock. They're answering hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails, daily from people who are in this situation, right? So they're dedicating, so much of their time, and that's Vesta, dedication. So there is, and that's happening obviously on a global basis. There's so much going on. I see so much going on in New York. New York and LA have been hit pretty hard. I think pretty much just as bad as Australia has, with not necessarily the lockdowns, but with the mandates of things, and the being locked out of things if you don't have particular documentation. So anyway, that's that's a very complex sort of subject, but we are aware of all that stuff going on. Also, I think it's important to address here that Mars, whilst it's reasonably far away from this new moon, it's still there. It's still there as a conjunction. So the Mars component is always a bit of a problem because Mars is quite a problematic planet. It's a malefic in traditional astrology, and Mars is always conflict, war, violence, anger, particularly when it's operating from those personality lower will levels. So we do have this edge of Mars there, which is a bit of a threatening sort of energy. In the state of the world at the moment, that the Mars being there just to me says more Martian type of activity, not as in aliens, as in authorities perhaps behaving in a particular way that's in fact quite aggressive and quite threatening to citizens. And we've seen a lot of that, haven't we? I've certainly seen a lot of it here in this country. So the Mars there is a little bit concerning from that level. I suspect that we're going to see more what appears to be aggression, coercion, or virtually forcing people into particular pathways that they don't want to go into. And again, I can't answer that for every single individual. I can't say to everyone, well, hey, don't worry about it, you'll be okay. It's a very personal thing, and we always have a choice. So we do have a choice. It may mean that we have to make a lot of adjustments and a lot of shifts and a lot of changes and a lot of juggling around, which is Virgo. Virgo is the quincunx, is the aspect, the inconjunct aspect corresponds to Virgo, right? Virgo is all about adjusting and figuring out what works and what doesn't work and how we're going to make this work and why will this actually work. So that's an underlying theme with this new moon as well. The Mars on a positive relative to our own personal chart and journey can be looked upon in a positive way from the level of it gives us the desire, the will, the energy, the stamina, the strength, and the courage to keep going in the particular position that we align ourselves with. And that's obviously different for all of us. But at the most hopeful level, that would be the Mars energy with this new moon, the desire and the courage to basically keep going in what appears to be the most incredible, difficult circumstances that we've ever faced in our life. The other thing that is challenging is this opposition from Neptune. Okay, so let me just clear some of those lines. So first of all, we've had this Mars-Neptune opposition. That's been very interesting for me personally. I won't go into what that was for me personally, but it's been quite an eye-opener, quite interesting. Some people did actually give some feedback, because I've spoken about the Mars-Neptune opposition in my previous video when I talked about the Sun ingressing into Virgo. So I don't want to repeat any of that, but just noticing that within this new moon, that Mars-Neptune opposition is actually still there, still within orbs, so it's still active. So it's part of this a pattern that actually is still there, which speaks to this new moon energy as well. And very simply put, at the external mundane personality ego-based level, Mars-Neptune is deceptive actions, deceptive behavior, pulling the wool over one's eyes, acting through desire and motivation for your own selfish personal needs and reasons, and doing it in a way where you create a false, present a false persona about yourself, let's say, right? So there's all of that in the mix, and obviously we can project that onto the global, Earth situation relative to the actions of, we could say, authorities here as well, because Mars rules the police force, for instance. Police force it's ruled by Saturn and Mars, actually. Isn't that interesting? The two malefics. Not saying that every single person who decides to take on that career path is, I'm not saying that they're neither good or bad. It's got nothing to do with that, but just the nature of that type of role and that type of authority is a very Mars-Saturn role, basically. So Mars in Virgo, is also reflecting that kind of what we're seeing on that external level relative to authority. Okay, the Neptune opposite the Mars, as I said, I won't talk about it because I've talked about it in my previous video, but it's still there within this new moon, so we kind of have to keep that in the background, just being very aware, in other words, of people's actions around us. That could be in our personal life, in our professional life, or just wherever. We just need to be very aware of that, and of course very aware of our own sort of intentions and desires and how we are acting with this Mars-Neptune. At the highest level, Mars-Neptune is a spiritual warrior. It's fighting for a spiritual cause without violence, because Mars is violence at the classic core level. It's war. It's the god of war. But with Neptune there is the potential to bring through courage, to bring through the spiritual warrior, to support your tribe, your community, whoever you are aligning with, and so forth. But just be very careful of people's actions and their real motivations and intentions behind what they're doing, perhaps. Now, this Neptune again connects to, well, the new moon, right? So we are stepping into a new moon cycle with Neptune being a strong voice, a strong presence, and Uranus as well. The Neptune opposite the sun, which I spoke about in my previous video, so I don't want to go into that again, but it is important to recognize that Neptune is a very important energy in this new moon, or with this new moon cycle. And Neptune is spirit, it's transcendence, it's a transcendental energy. But at the everyday personality, 3D reality, it's deception and disillusionment and disappointment. Simple. Deception, disillusionment, disappointment. 3Ds. 3D. Huh. I just made that connection. That's pretty funny. That's how it operates at that level. And so because we can't deny the 3D reality, we don't have to be, how can I put it? We are a part of it from the point of view of we are living on this 3D sort of earth plane, but relative to our consciousness and what we perceive, understand and understand, the power, and I've always said this throughout every single video I've done, more or less, the power always resides within our own self, because we have the power to choose how we perceive, what we are going to focus on, and how we are going to respond. We always have that power. So there is a timeline splitting, timeline shifting, and the 3D is crumbling, and there is 5D, which is literally just virtually at the tip of our nose. It's right here, right now. It's a shifting consciousness, because this cataclysmic 3D crisis is it's ramping up, but it is going to eventually come to some kind of completion, and we're going to transition into the next level. That's inevitable because nothing is permanent, right? So that gives us hope as well. But I think with this Neptune opposite the new moon, we are possibly going to see a lot more deception and confusion. Like we need any more of that, right? But Neptune's there. It's there opposite the new moon. So it's and oppositions are always polarized energies, right? So the Neptune will just get projected onto the collective narrative. And we have two choices. We can get dragged into the hysteria of fear, or we can tune into spirit, because that's what Neptune is, through your higher self. Your higher self. Remember who you are, your higher self. I am my higher self. Have it as a mantra. I am my higher self. I see through my higher self. I understand through my higher self. Little mantras like that just jolt you back into that alignment. So we can either look through Neptune, as I said, through the fear, hysteria, disillusionment, chaos of this narrative that is basically false and deceptive, in my humble opinion. Or we can gravitate towards spirit and allow spirit to wash over us with love, with that energy of love, aligning with our higher self, to see truth, because Neptune is the ultimate truth. So the choice is ours. So they're the two different ways that Neptune opposition is going to speak throughout this new moon cycle. Let me see, what else did I have here? Mars is forming an exact trine to Pluto. I like that. even though Mars and Pluto energies can potentially be extremely difficult on the personality level, because at the personality level, those are the frequencies that correspond to war, aggression, death, things like that. That's just how it is. That those are the archetypes. But at the more sort of awake spiritual level, for lack of a better word, Mars-Pluto is the ability to align soul, Pluto, Mars, will. Highest will, Pluto, lower will, Mars. And in essence, our spiritual evolution, doesn't matter how it looks, the fundamental desire for the soul is to align the lower will and the highest will, so that it basically acts as a vehicle and an agent for source and truth, where it will ultimately return back to. But the separating desires, as they are called in evolutionary astrology, are what end up being experiences, which is important. We're all here to evolve. We're all here to have different experiences. There's no right or wrong at the absolute essence of our own evolutionary path. But the separating desires, they are what take us out into the different experiences that we have. And Mars is such a big player in that, because Mars is not about unity, love, peace, spirit. It's about my own intense, passionate desires and will forces and power and what I actually want. And that's fine to an extent, because that's necessary to an extent. But when that is completely out of touch with our highest will, it is the most, selfish, self-centered baseline of operation. So having a Mars trine Pluto speaking through this new moon, again, we have a choice. From a personal level, this energy speaks to naturally, in the most effortless way, finding a sense within us to align our highest will with our lower will relative to our personal circumstances and the global situation as well. So an incredibly powerful aspect. It's a regenerative aspect as well. It is about power, strength, courage to basically keep going through a particular narrative that seems impossible in a lot of ways and is incredibly frustrating, no doubt, in a lot of ways. But we will rise above it and we will move through it and we will come out on the other side. It doesn't matter what it looks like right now. Mars-Pluto can help us do that. So I really like that aspect, at that more sort of transcendent level. Okay. Let's see, what else do we have? Chiron opposite Mercury. I think that's a very important aspect relative to this new moon cycle as well. Okay, sorry, just before I talk about that, I would just also like to highlight that, where is it? Okay, so Mars, Jupiter, Mars, Eris, Eris, Jupiter. So that's a Yod. And that's got to be a pretty important Yod for the reasons of this. First of all, they are all at 24 degrees. It's not typical to get a Yod and have every single planet at the exact same degree. It's not typical. Trust me. Have a look at people's charts. Have a look at new moon charts, full moon charts, have a look at anything. You won't see this very often. So that's got to be very important for that reason. When things show up at the same degree, in a particular pattern, or when you get critical degrees involved, there's something very powerful about these energies. It's not to be taken lightly. The fact that we've got Eris involved is pretty significant given that Eris is actually in square to Pluto and literally exactly at the moment. So Eris is a very powerful voice in the whole narrative, right, as we are aware. It is a bit concerning because Mars and Eris are both planets that would have to do with destructive forces at a negative level. That's just a fact. The hopeful thing is that Jupiter's involved, and Jupiter, to some extent, will offer perhaps some protection. Jupiter is the planet of protection. It's a planet of many things, but one thing it is a planet of protection. Wherever Jupiter is in your chart, that's where you are protected, by the way. Of course, there's a lot more to it, you know, the sign it's in, house it's in, aspects, yada, yada, yada. But I do like that Jupiter is in this Yod, the protective component. The thing, though, is that the apex planet, as it is termed in this Yod, is Mars. So there is always an apex planet in a Yod, and the apex planet is the planet that's sitting on its own, okay, which is Mars. And Mars at the apex of a Yod is a pretty difficult apex planet. It can go in a lot of different directions, and at the hands of the unconscious, it can be pretty severe conflict. So for that reason, I wouldn't be surprised if we see, you know, just a lot more pushback and conflict from both sides and from authorities as well. I totally expect that to happen. Mercury Chiron. This is, at a personal level, it is about being, I suppose, more aware of the dialogue that we are having with others. Mercury in Libra, being able to see both sides to every situation. The Chiron component, however, will most certainly bring up the matters of feeling that what you say and what you think is just being rejected and not understood by others, and vice versa. And that's just going to be a theme that's going to come up in people's communications, conversations, dialogue, both in personal and or professional status and positions. And so how do we reconcile that? I think we reconcile it by understanding that there are two sides to everything. We don't need to make somebody else wrong so that we can be right. That's just an ego game. And so the way to smash that ego game is to just simply know where you stand in your position and be okay with that, regardless of whether it's accepted, understood, or rejected. That's called awareness, that's called consciousness, that's called maturity, that's called objectivity, that's called being above the ego, because you don't need to make others wrong so that you can be right. So I think that's just perhaps an important sort of theme that's actually already in play. Seeing a lot of it on social media. You know, it's a very, very delicate, a very delicate ether around us at the moment because of the amount of fear, insecurity, and suffering that's going on, and how easily we can just get wrapped up in that and just lose sight of the bigger picture, because in the bigger picture, the transition of the next phase with truth and the light that's flooding in, nothing can ever take away the light. It literally can't. You can't deny light. You can try, but the power of And as cliche as this sounds, and I don't care if it does, but the truth is that there is no greater force and power than love. There literally isn't. So it is going to prevail. It always does. But we also need to be able to see that, embrace it, tune into it, work with it. And just lastly, before I go, two things actually. On the 16th of September, where are you, Mouse? There you are. On the 16th of September, what's going to happen is High Gear is going to catch up to Neptune. So High Gear will be 21 degrees of Virgo. So what's that? That's about a week or so away. That is going to be a very important time. Those few days, that week is going to be very important around medical information. And you need to be very careful about what you are believing. And just finally, Virgo and the moon in Virgo, new moon in Virgo, in esoteric astrology, the moon is the ruler of Virgo. So this is a very powerful new moon cycle for all the reasons of everything that I've just explained. In addition to that, we can add the esoteric frequency understanding component. And the moon in Virgo is a very psychic, clairvoyant type of energy. It's a very, very powerful place for the moon in Virgo. The interesting thing is that it's opposite Neptune, and Neptune is, well, actually, I just want to read this comment here. Where is it? I've just lost that comment. It's, just bear with me while I just yeah. So esoterically, the moon rules Virgo. Esoterically, Neptune rules Cancer. So there's a very specific alignment here between two bodies that are exchanging a particular energy that's got to do with spirit, consciousness, love, oneness, unity, the ability to see higher truths. So the new moon in Virgo has that potential in it as well, the ability to see beyond the barriers of the mental constructs that we have created, which includes everything, our beliefs, what we understand, what we don't understand, etc., etc. And because Neptune is the ruler, the esoteric ruler of Cancer, and it's opposite this new moon, well, it's a double message, really, a double signature, because the moon is the exoteric ruler of Cancer. Neptune is the esoteric ruler of Cancer. These two bodies are opposite each other. So there's a double signature here of potential for greater truths to be understood, integrated, downloaded, and seen. And you know that those things come through in different ways for all of us. We it just depends who you are. I mean, I see messages coming to me in all sorts of ways. For example, I was thinking about my dad, which I do every day, but on a couple of days ago, I was thinking about him very intensely, and just needed a direction from him. And he gave me the direction through a particular tarot card, which was the sun, actually, the sun card. And it was just such a beautiful message that was given to me from him. And then 2 seconds later, I saw something, where was it? Something flash up online. I was just looking at something, and then his name just appeared through what appeared to be a totally disconnected matter. So his name came through immediately after I just picked up that card and sat with the message that I was given. Why am I telling you this? Even though it's a very personal thing, I'm sharing this because I'm simply reminding us, all of us, that Spirit is speaking to us all the time. We just have to be able to recognize the cues and make the connections. Sometimes, it can be a bit tricky because you think, "What, God, am I losing my mind or what? Is this a coincidence?" No, it's not a coincidence. These things happen very purposefully. Spirit tries to reach us purposefully all the time. It is our own resistance and barriers that resist that. And so our job is to break those down in order to receive. It's always that. Right. I think I'm done. I will be back because I want to talk. I'm always going to be back, but the next session that I'll bring to the table will be possibly Venus in Scorpio, which is going to be a really interesting journey. She's got quite an interesting journey to go through when she's in Scorpio with the aspects she's picking up with lots of other planets. Of course, Mercury is going to go retrograde soonish, I think end of this month. And by the way, just one other thing, let me just bring this back up again. In this new moon chart, Mercury is at 10 degrees of Libra. You can see that there, right? Just perhaps there's people that aren't familiar with symbols. So there's Mercury, okay, at 10 degrees of Libra in this new moon chart. Now, this is Mercury's beginning of shadow. So Mercury in shadow in this new moon chart and opposite Chiron. The reason it's shadow period beginning is because when Mercury is it when Mercury goes direct? Let me see. Yeah, when Mercury goes retrograde, it actually happens at about 25 degrees of Libra, but when it eventually turns to go direct again, it actually takes place at 10 degrees of Libra. So that Mercury retrograde cycle is going to, these energies are going to be speaking into that cycle as well. And most certainly the square between Mercury and Pluto, because when Mercury turns to go retrograde, it's going to be 25 degrees, which is going to be squaring Pluto. So that we've got Mercury in shadow, all right, already in place. So we know Mercury retrograde and Mercury in shadow does bring up a lot of hiccups and delays and a number of different things. But always, with any planet turning retrograde, it is the opportune time to go inside and retrieve and understand and see and listen to what otherwise is a lot more difficult to connect with or to tune into. So yeah. Right. I'll see you guys very, very soon. Sending you all much love and much blessings, and stay strong, stay in your truth, stay in power, stay aligned, and call on spirit or open up to spirit more. It's always there, no matter what. Even in the darkest, 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 darkest days, it's always there. See you soon.